Thank you very much indeed. What I hope to do up to about 20 to 5 today is to get a good discussion going on the bridging Eurasia concept that we've been talking about this morning, but to try and, if I could say, put some meat on the bone as to what that actually means. And we've a very good panel of experts here to talk about that, and I'm hoping if I can keep control of them, we may even get some chance for questions from you people in the floor. So without further ado, so that we can keep to our timetable of 20 to 5, it's my pleasure to first of all ask Mr. Sergei Aristov, State Secretary and Deputy Minister of Transport for the Russian Federation, to say a few words. Mr. Aristov.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of such a large-scale forum for organizing this event and for those very interesting issues put on discussion. In my short speech, I would like to touch upon a very global issue, but which is touched quite seldom during our sessions. That's actually about the single railway ride. In the Eurasia, we have two shapes of the transport law. This is actually agreement with the an agreement with the MGS and the common rules on international railway transport, the CIM system. In 2005, the European Commission, when it has its own railway working group, set a plan of 3 steps how to develop and unite the railway transport. The first one, the creation of a pan-European railway transport system, harmonization of the border control for the railway transport, and the negotiations to create the single railway legislation. The first 2 positions are already well developed, despite the positions. And the third position that I already announced about the negotiations about creating the single railway legislation are still in the very beginning. I cannot tell you that something hasn't been done here. We are talking about the using this steam SMGS bill, railway bill of lading, because it's a document to use, and we are talking about the transport legislation. It also identifies the liabilities and responsibilities of all the shippers and the customers. Certainly, we can also use, we can say that these issues are already resolved in other means of trade. Yes, but the aviation has its holes and requirements. The sea transport has also its own requirements. In aviation, we have ICAO requirements. And here, there is a gauge that divides us, but it also unites us. But in terms of legal issues, we're unfortunately quite far from each other. The working group to unite these rights is facing some obstacles, but it still works. And in this connection, I can tell you that the OIS, CATIF, and other associations are welcoming this work, and they are fulfilling this work in their platforms. But I can tell you quite honest that both organizations are quite jealous to each other, because sometimes one of the youth organizations is above of the others. Probably the officials do not want to unite these systems. The position of our ministry is as follows, because the different shapes of legislation are a real barrier for the development of the railway. And the working group under EU has a trust from European and Asian railway organizations, and it is working group is headed by the Russian Ministry of Transport, and this working group prepared a document that can give you an opportunity to create this basic transport legislation. The first stage one is actually to prepare in 2011. Unfortunately, it's not over to a memorandum of understanding, including all the common conditions for all the Eurasian transport contracts. And this actually there should be governmental document in how to sign it. This second stage is also an intermediate one from 2012 to 2015. We have to work out additional legal standard documents, and this third stage is a global one where the documents of the CATIF and OSJT should be agreed. I don't want to give you any more details how this process are happening in our working group, because the European colleagues and the ASAD colleagues prepared their text versions. The European version is more general and reminds me a memorandum with the principles and approaches that are not really practical, and they are more based on the contractual law. The document prepared by the Russian Federation is supported by the OSCJT, is actually more precise and identifies the relationships between the shippers, the freight receivers, and the customers. Actually, we certainly prefer this version than the European one. In March of this year, we had a great discussion of these two versions, and we worked out a compromise, or at least we made a first step to compromise. It's probably the third version that actually disliked by both parties, unfortunately. Talking about our bridging between Eurasia, I would like to ask you to take an active part in this work. Thank you very much.
Secretary, a good start to the discussion. I next pass to Mr. Mikhail Arrow, the Vice President of the VR Group. Mikhail.
Okay, thank you. Brian, I would like to start a little bit with the personal traffic. We have been hearing quite a lot about logistics. A few words still about personal traffic as well. If we look at the EU's strategies and EU's plans, it says that all the long business trips, 50% of them in the distance of 300 to 1,000 kilometers, to be made by train in 2050. And of course, in Finland, how we read this means also on the 1520 and between Europe and Russia, definitely. We have from our capital is 1,000 kilometers away from Moscow. We have our capitals much closer to St. Petersburg, for example. So this is, of course, a very big challenge for us and the Russian railways. And I can say that quite a lot of development ongoing on that one. But I would still want to point out, and of course, Brian is in many ways in the driver's seat, and also Commissioner Kallas, that we actually get some action behind these plans. Of course, if you look at railways and especially on the passenger side, I think we really think that we are very good in the customer service and with the consumer. And I'm not saying that we are not, but I would still point out that the consumers and the consumer habits are changing, and I think we have a big work in the industry to work on our service. I think, for example, in our company, even though I think that the services gets good grades in many ways, I think still we have a lot of things to do. And this also goes back to the discussion what we are discussing here, that how do I get tickets between the countries? How do I get service with my luggage? How the whole trip is made? And I think we have very much work to be done there. And we have to bear in mind that the consumer of the future really wants to travel by railways. We did launch a new now I would like to change my slide. This is not working. We did launch a new service between Helsinki and St. Petersburg, and I think that quite many people in the audience here also know about the project. And I would say that, as I wrote on the slide, that it's a lot more than just a fast rail connection. I mean, the amount of regulation when you want to launch a new service between the EU and Russia. And even though we have the same gauge, and in Finland we have many things easier than in the Central Europe, still I would say that we did have to change legislation in both of the countries, and the regulation which we have here is absolutely horrendous. I've been working in brewing industry, selling alcohol before I joined the railways, and it's now 3 years ago I changed to railways, and the amount of regulation you would expect to have in selling alcohol is nothing compared to the new regulation we always get from EU or from local authorities, and it's really bad. And I must say that I fully support Dr. Gruber's comment about regulation killing the business. It's not helping the consumer, it's not helping the business. I think something needs to be done with this. Then in the panel in the morning we had quite a lot of discussion about China and Europe and the transfer there. I would still want to point out that we also have quite a lot of possibilities for railways nearer also. We have this new sulfur emission regulation in the Baltic Sea and penalty payments for that. It's a big thing for our part of Europe, and of course this also needs to be seen as an opportunity for railways. Railways is very environmental friendly, and this gives us a good opportunity to work together. Then of course trailers and containers. This we should definitely develop. But here already pointed out in the morning that, for example, in Finland, if this what we can see in the picture, these cargoes would be moving by road. There's no payment for the infrastructure, but if you put them on top of a rail car, we have to pay infrastructure ourselves. And I think this is really something for the EU to look at very seriously. Then also one thing about railway which we always have to bear in mind is that you know, railway is a big part of the things what we leave for our children, for the next generations. I think the previous generations left us with good working railway systems in many countries, and we should definitely foresee that that our generation, in spite of euro crisis and what have you, financial problems at the moment, and I'm not saying that they are small problems, they are huge problems, but still, if we leave a world to our children which is not sustainable for environmentals, this is not good. Then, of course, my last slide. Of course, there's a lot of transit possibilities, and as we heard, it's only a small portion of the cargo going by rail, and this is also for this forum and this panel to discuss more. But many people already spoke about this, so I leave it here. Thank you very much for being able to come here, and thank you for organizing this.
Thank you very much, Mikael. And next is Christian Kern, who is the CEO of OBB Holdings. Christian, do you need the...
They don't need the slide changer. So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, first let me say thank you very much for the invitation to come here, especially to Vladimir Yakunin, who is the motor of a significant development which will change the European landscape, I'm sure. But we heard in the last hours a lot of aspects of the extension of the East-Western corridor, and I would concentrate on stressing some additional aspects, 2 or 3 more considerations which I believe could be of interest. The first thing is, and it was mentioned this morning, is that Europe faces a significant challenge. The challenge is, on the one hand, to bring public accounts in line, to consolidate them, and on the other hand, which is even more important, to generate growth. In these days, everybody discusses how we can generate growth in Europe, and while it's easy to find an austerity answer to the question of public account consolidation, it's much more tricky to find a significant and probable answer for the question of how we can generate growth. But if we look at the basic facts, we can see that the forecast for 2012 for Europe is an economic growth, GDP growth, of slightly above 0. While in Russia, the forecast says it's going to be around 4, and in China, something around 8%. So it's easy to draw the conclusion that for Europe, it's very crucial to be linked and tied with the dynamic development in the more Eastern economies. So working on the erection and construction of an sufficient European and East-West corridor is a crucial challenge for the European Commission, for the whole of Europe, for sure. The second aspect is, if you look at this growth discussion, is the short-term effect of constructing a project, for example, like the extension of the broad gauge from Košice to Vienna, which will be presented by Mr. Goncharov later on. Austria has a tradition in anti-cyclic investments, and if it comes to railway, for example, Austria will spend in the next 5 years 12 billion euros in renewing and construction of new tracks, which is a significant amount, especially if you put it in relation to our GDP, and perhaps in relative terms, that's the biggest or the most ambitious investment within the European Union. We are completely convinced that the effect for GDP growth is significant, and if you look at the most important benchmarks of the Austrian economy, you can see that this is a winning concept, together with some other factors like educational system. Austria has the lowest unemployment rate. We have by far the lowest unemployment rate for youths, and GDP is above the European average. So that's just one consideration why we are very supportive for the idea of extending the broad gauge track to Austria. The second aspect, which is of great importance also for us, is that if you compare the figures, the share of rail cargo, the modal split share of rail cargo, you will see that in the United States or in Russia, the share is almost 40%. In China, it's 30%. In the European Union, it's just 15%. So it's clearly indicated that there is a catch-up demand for the European economies. And this is matching with another development, which is, to put it in other figures, that 20% of the daily oil exploration is consumed by the transportation sector. So if we believe that the climate change will stay on top of the agenda of our economies, because it has a significant influence in economic development, green cargo should be basically a favorable concept. The second aspect, and which is even more interesting if it comes to the green issues, is that consumer patterns are changing. And it's not only a Western European imagination. My personal belief is, if you look at most recent surveys, you will see that it has a broader impact. For example, 84% of the consumers in China, India, Malaysia, and Singapore would be willing to pay a premium for products which are organically or organic grown or organic produced. So this is a good basis and a good development which should be in favor of our joint activities. Unfortunately, the question arises, can we reap these benefits? Can we reap the ideas of green logistics? And what we have to face today is that it's definitely not happened in the past, and I have also some doubts concerning the future. And the main reason for that is that we clearly do not have a level playing field with our transportation modes. Internalization of external costs, still an open issue. Pollution, congestion, accident costs are not charged, for example, the road freight. Besides the growth issue and the green issue, which make us being in favor of the extension of our broad gauge project, there is a third one, which I think is useful to stress. And I'm sure you're all aware that a couple of months ago, Warren Buffett, the US investor, injected $34 billion in an investment into an American cargo company, Burlington Railway Company. And the interesting question would be, if you would be his advisor, would you ask him or propose to him that he should do the same in Europe? Should he invest billions of US dollars into European cargo businesses? And my personal belief is that the clear answer is no. By no means put your fingers off of that business. And the reason for that is that we can see that the sector today is in a very bad shape. The average company, for sure, is not able over an economic cycle to earn its cost of capital. If you look at the year 2011, I think with 1, 2, perhaps 3 rare exceptions, all the players destroyed value. In our case, for example, in Austria, we have, after 4 years of suffering, now reached at least an operative, a positive cash flow, and have managed to realize a positive EBIT margin. But that's definitely far away from the limits and the targets we have set for our business, which is definitely earning the cost of capital. And even if we have discussed today the case of BMW, which is a very impressive one, and what Deutsche Bahn has done here is really outstanding, my full respect for that. Even if we mention this, we have to see that this is definitely a very unique case. And
И я уверен, что на данный момент невозможно это реализовать на более масштабном уровне, просто потому что у нас пока нет конкурентоспособного продукта для наших клиентов.
Its punctuality, its reliability, its speed, of course, and its reasonable pricing. And my personal belief is that we are still years away from matching these customer demands, although everybody of us is working very hard on that subject. So the conclusion is that there is a lot of homework to do to improve the competitive position of cargo companies all over Europe. And a lot of homework can be done which is not really costly. For example, if you look at the idea of cutting down national boundaries, very important. Administration is a completely tragedy. legal frameworks, Michael Aro has mentioned that, also a very important point. They should be supportive in improving the competitive position of railway. And my feeling for today is that the opposite is true, that if you would explain Warren Buffett the recast system, the European packages system, European lawsuits, and by the way, hundreds of differing national regulations for technological issues, he would be bored to death and by no way invest his money into a European company. And to my personal belief, there is another not very comfortable issue which has to be settled in the next years, and that is that if you look at the cargo businesses in Europe, you will see a very fragmented patchwork. You will see an industry with their incumbents struggle with their...
Christian, can you wind it up, please?
I'm at the end. Who struggle with their historical heritage, and you see some niche players. And to my personal belief, it's also up to the industry to bring on consolidation, because in the end, it's only viable if we have 5, 6, 7, perhaps strong players in the end to reap the economies of scale and to be strong enough to invest in cargo activities. So bringing all together, European extension of broad gauge is an important project. We are highly in favor of that, but we have to do our homework first, and we need a proof of concept, and the proof of concept is to generate more volumes from the street, from the sea to rail, and if you do not match this requirement, I'm sure this whole concept would have a significant lack of credibility. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Next is the President of Russian Railways, Mr. Vladimir Yakunin, who I'm sure doesn't need more of an introduction than that. So, Mr. Yakunin. Less, if you could.
Okay. Уважаемые товарищи, уважаемые дамы.
Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, this is the continuation of those panel discussions that have been carried out today. And speaking about bridging Europe and Asia, my colleagues, professionals of very high level, have listed all major problems resulting from this integration or associated with this integration, including the legal problems, technological problems, some domestic problems. The implementation or the need for implementation of national programs is also very important. But there is also another aspect which we have not mentioned. Getting back to the slides in the previous presentation, there was one slide where it was written, "Railroad isn't yet finished." Do you remember this? This is a joke in this context. In a restaurant, a waiter approaches a client and tells him, "Sir, are you finished?" As a result, the client said, "No, I'm Scottish." Speaking about integration and the development of these systems, we need to touch upon another subject. This is the subjective factor, the mentality of the people communicating with each other. If we talk today about interaction on the level of railways, it is equally comfortable for us to discuss the enlarging of the Eurasian transport corridor with railway people, with Austrian railways, and with Slovakia or with Germany, or with our colleagues from the Baltic states. But very frequently, in real life, when we say some phrases on one common language, we understand that these words have been pronounced, but the meaning of these phrases, of these words, is very different as far as each participant in the negotiations understands them, because of the cultural and national specific features of each person. So it's not enough to learn good English or even good Chinese, but if you do negotiations in English, you need to make sure that you have mutual understanding of what you have agreed upon. It's very important, and I want to back up Mr. Khan, who said that it's very important to extend the broad gauge. The Finnish develop very well, and they sell their products very well. And this mutual understanding of mutual benefits is the basis for mental bridging. If we speak about creating new transport corridors, even between ourselves, people who belong to the same culture, who speak the same language, sometimes there are problems of understanding. There are several myths related to railways. One myth says that railways is the most conservative industry. Another myth says that railway people always have enough funds and they can invest in their own infrastructure on a commercial basis because they can get their money back. The third myth says that a state-owned company and its management are always less efficient and less well-trained than the management of private companies. There are other myths, but I would like to speak about the last one. Dear colleagues, several years ago, when statements that the private business is always more efficient than the business belonging to the state were said, it was difficult to argue with that, because it was written in textbooks according to which economy was taught in the best international business schools. But over the past few years, the company Russian Railways, the government-owned company, shows better comparative results than privately owned companies. No direct statements like this are said. We survived the crisis of 2008 better than privately owned companies, and unlike private companies, we did not go to the government asking for our losses to be covered. We were able to place our Eurobonds in pounds in such a way that Europe recognized this placement of shares to be, of bonds to be the best in Europe. We occupy a better rank, a better place than other companies. And the rating which Russian Railways has, which is equal to the sovereign rating of Russia, is only the rating which no other company but Russian Railways has. So I don't think we can say that government-owned companies are not efficient enough. Another case is that a reform, unless it is a revolution, always comes down from the top. And for that, we need to have a critical mass of top managers who understand the goals set by the government and by the public, and who implement those goals, who bring them down to each employee of the company. Of course, we can't say that 1 million employees of Russian Railways understand their goals of reforming as well as the president do. Is wishful thinking. Very frequently, it is much easier for us to speak to administrations of other countries than to agree between each other. That's why it's so important that we have the Ministry of Transport with us today. It's very important that we understand in the same way the problems of normative basis. And I think this is key to our future success in creating such a system, in a system which would bridge Europe and Asia. Just think about it. Container trains have already been ordered for 18,000 containers. Just imagine 10,000 containers. It's when the Trans-Siberian Railway would be full of containers from beginning to end. What is 18,000 containers which are loaded off in Antwerp and or in Rotterdam or elsewhere? This would be a collapse of the transport system. So, transporting containers by sea has its limits, and this is where we have our competitive advantages of reducing the travel time, making transport speedier. Even if we have ships which deliver containers to various ports, that would be a nightmare. And today, professional transport people understand it very well. This is our competitive advantage, the competitive advantage of railways. We can provide or deliver a smaller amount of containers from A to B, but we can deliver them on schedule, on time, and of course, we are focused on expensive cargoes with a high value added, and this is our goal. Thank you.
The next speaker is from the Community of European Railways, the Executive Director, Libor Lochman. Libor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Brian. If possible, I would like to ask the technicians to display my slides on the screen. Maybe not. I don't know. Yeah, thank you. So first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak here today at this important event and at the important session called the Bridging Eurasia, Bridging 1520 and 1435. If I would like to speak about what it could mean for us, first a few words about who is a CR. CR is a community of European railway infrastructure companies, is the association, this is the European association representing interests of almost 80 members acting on the territory of European Union and accession countries, offering the business in the passenger freight services, managing the infrastructure, and all having the common interest, doing that, of course, with the most profitable way. And we are representing them in Brussels vis-à-vis the European institutions. But certainly, although we are focused on a European legislation, regulation, it goes across the border of the European Union. And this is what we see as utmost important, to understand the consequences of the business in Europe and understand that, as it has been said a few times, although already in our panel, that it is absolutely essential to see where is the potential for the growth of the business. And in our opinion, of course, it is especially at the land border we have, at the border between Europe and Asia. And if we should reach that target of increasing the business, especially the rail freight business in Europe, we have to think of what to do with improving the quality of the infrastructure, with improving the possibility to transfer the cargo between East and West using the current and the future rail links. And that's why we really appreciate that there is an understanding that the primary role needs to be played by the quality of the infrastructure. This is what needs to be further improved, because without having the quality of the high-quality infrastructure, we will never be able to deliver the services for our customers. We will never be able to compete vis-à-vis the road and maritime, which are the competitors, especially in this more or less a global dimension linking East and West. So this is number one. If we should speak about the future extension of our businesses and growth potential, including the cross-border links between Europe and Asia, on whatever gauge, we have to improve the infrastructure. Second, of course, we have to also set the parameters in a way that would allow such a businesses, and this both on a political and a technical level, where we are happy that the European Rail Agency is working on a technical side, analyzing the consequences of the new regulatory framework in the countries who are the members of the European Union, and the cooperation with the countries of the Commonwealth of Independent States. But of course, it's not enough. We need also to have ambitious long-term perspectives. So we need to analyze also how to improve the transshipment facilities, how to explore furthermore the possibilities for the opening of the rail market, again, not just on the territory of the EU, but how to provide this opportunity for the market opening also across the border towards the third countries. And this is the challenge that we have, because without that, we can't succeed. How is the CR supporting that? As I said, that CR has got a primary focus on the issues in Brussels, but since we have the members who are at the border and who do operate in the 1520 and 1524 millimeter business or rail gauge, we have to take a special care of those countries, starting from Finland, going through the Baltic states, and recently, since we have a new member, Moldovan Railway, also taking this company that is, again, on the interface between 1435 and 1520. So what we offer and what we do support, what we provide as a support is analysis of the convergences of the EU legislation with consideration of specificities of the 1520 business, because that's really important to understand. And this is important to understand on both sides. On the side of the Commission, that the business on the 1520 territory is not the same, because the orientation, the character is different compared to the central area of Europe. But it is also important for our members from the territory of the 1520 millimeter railways and being the members of the EU to understand what are the implications of the European regulation. But it's not all. We have some particular issues, like, for example, related with the staff and the stamping of passport, if I will be particular, issues related to the taxation that need to be harmonized. And what regards then the technical standards and the cooperation, we are really looking forward to cooperate more and more with the agency in a way how we can converge the assessment procedures that would enable us to have the similar standards for authorization of the vehicles on the interface across the 1520 borders, and then in future also 1520, 1435. So with that, I would like again to thank you for inviting me to the session, and we're more than happy to contribute more in the discussion.
Thank you very much, Libor. Next is Jean-Pierre Lubinot. Jean-Pierre is the General Director of the International Union of Railways, UIC. So Jean-Pierre.
So good afternoon, and thank you, Brian. Thank you as well for the invitation to participate to this forum and to support this wonderful vision. You know, when railways propose to unite regions or to unite the world, therefore you see the crowds coming in, and I think this is a very good symbol with the attendance to this forum today. The development of this Euro-Asian links is, of course, a very long-term process, and I believe that it answers 5 key issues. First, of course, a very strong political will, a commitment of the countries concerned, and this, from the speeches this morning, from the various signatures of memorandums later, we know it is acquired. But we also need to have a very careful use of scarce financial resources. We need to have the appropriate balance between the new developments needed, and also the updating and maintenance of the existing infrastructure. And last but not least, we need cooperation. Cooperation and not competition between all the concerned parties. In this respect, as you can see, UIC as a Rail Transport Global Association, worldwide association, tries to cope with the current challenges of mobility and sustainable development in Europe and in Asia, obviously. Also to develop international cooperation through global projects, to build a consistent railway system based on the three basic principles of interoperability, safety, and security, which is a growing concern, and to also coordinate the activities to ensure the development of economy through mobility of goods and people, and vice versa. The actions of UIC consist in first and foremost coordination. Coordination of the activities of all our experts on behalf of various members or organizations, coordinating the interaction of international activity via cooperation, which is our motto, summarizing the experience of international organizations to use the best benefits of benchmarking and not to reinvent the wheel, to promote and provide transparency of the development of business, to facilitate the implementation of innovation and standards, because we will need standards to realize such projects, and to monitor, of course, all the obstacles. Most of them have been already mentioned, whether they are administrative, legal, fiscal, or technical on these international corridors. The UIC works with a number of partners, and you know, the challenges of the transport between Europe and Asia answer actually what I call 3I. They are international, which is already very complex. They are integrated, or should be more integrated, which is a very difficult goal to obtain. And they are intermodal, which is also providing a number of facilities, but of complexities at the same time. In this context, UIC can play a role as an international organization. We are recognized as an NGO by the United Nations. We are a member of ECOSOC, and therefore have access to a huge database of statistics, documents, market studies, which can be, of course, a very important source for all these business cases and vision. But also, we work with a number of other associations. You have them on the list here displayed, from OSGD, of course, but CCTT, CIT, OTIF, UNESCAP, UNEP, UNECE, the European Railway Agency, and CR, obviously, Libor has just mentioned it. At the same time, we are part of different objectives shared with the World Bank or the Asian Bank of Development. We work with FIATA, the European Intermodal Association, and we are getting closer and closer with ISO precisely for this issue of standards. So, as a technical platform, UIC is really at the center of what we want to be a coherent approach with a main objective. We have to consider that this vision of corridors, it's very easy to say, it's not as easy to do, but must be approached as any project of railway development as a system. And you know, all these international organizations, which I have mentioned before, are themselves already involved in a number of projects, especially on the 1520 side. And on the other hand, all the members of UIC, most of them being part, or a large number of them being part of these associations, work on projects linked already with the development of Euro-Asian corridors, especially aiming at the development of interfaces between the 1435 and the 1520 systems. This is the ATGS system, but also projects, but also trying to spin off the business development with the promotion of the rail mode. I would like to have one specific word of Russia, not because we are in Sochi, but because we are in Russia. And geographically, Russia is obviously a key player in these developments of east and west corridors, also north-south corridors. It was calculated, and someone this morning, I think the gentleman there mentioned the UIC studies and statistics, to say that probably the Russian network can comply with about 80% of the ton kilometers that can actually be transported in these corridors linking Europe and Asia. So it means that there is a tremendous potential in the potentiality, the facilities of RZD infrastructures. You know, I was not very long ago, a couple of weeks ago, in Irkutsk, and I could see there between Irkutsk and Novosibirsk one of the Trans-Siberian routes. And there, it's 12,000 tons with head-on time of 4 minutes. Just a few words and a few figures to show the importance of the business development on these routes. I will not go far longer, Brian, I'm sorry, but just a few things to say that the various projects that we are updating with UIC within UIC is the harmonization of cargo studies through the ECOMOD study that we have developed and giving precisely the potential of container development on these routes, and which can really be an excellent base for all European rail and Asian initiative. Infrastructure development, I mentioned already the project that we technically support with the European Agency and OSGD as the automatic track gauge changes. Operational issues, and especially the unique consignment bill. It is tested at the moment on some of the corridors, which Dr. Rauch will probably mention, but this must be generalized, and this is not as easy as to mention. And last but not least, improving the security of the goods, which is, as I said, a growing concern. We develop these these studies and project with CCTT in particular, which is now getting more and more involved in the UIC projects and developments. And last but not least, I think that there will be another list of projects to develop, but I would not miss one, which is the training of our staff to really perform this new transcontinental operational in perfect efficiency and perfect safety. So to conclude, UIC is really in the middle of a number of actors, a number of projects, and we are really ready to grow with all of them this vision, which is not very much different than the very basic origin creation of UIC. That was interoperability. At the time, in 1922, it was interoperability between neighboring countries. Now it's between continents. Thank you.
Thank you very much. As a moderator who is tight for time, I love those words, last but not least. And in conclusion, they're my favorite words. The next speaker is Ivis Ronis, who is the Latvian Transport Minister. So, Minister.
Спасибо, я буду...
Thank you very much. I will speak Russian. I apologize in advance for in my Russian. They are probably grounded not with the political aspects, but probably are not really 400% aware of the Russian grammar. I'm here for three reasons. The reason one is support for the Latvian railways, because it's also a part of 1520 area, you know, to keep the relationships between Russia and Latvia. And I also would like to support the relationships between the EU and the 1520 Family Festival with RZD. Latvia, because we are Baltic, from the Baltic states are different. I don't want to tell you on behalf of the other Baltic countries, but the situation in Latvia is quite interesting because we are on two fields at the same time. We are in the economic and commercial field of EU. However, our rail way is within the business standards and regulation of 1520 area. 90% of cargoes transport by our railways generated in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia and Russia. In order to be competitive in the market, we have to sit on two chairs at the same time, and I'm really wondering how our Latvian railways managed to do it and able to carry even more cargoes every year. Certainly we need to get closer, and we talked a lot about it today. We need to bring both fields closer. I mean, regulation, the standardization of the EU with the standards of 1520, because we see that the cargo flow is growing. Russia is entering WTO, what means additional freights from Russia to Western countries, the common economic space, I mean Russia, Belarus and Kazakhstan, means more investments of international companies into the Russian economy, means Russia will get more production sites. It will also require more deliveries and supplies to Russia and the use of these transport corridors and ways. And I'm absolutely happy that the EU Commissioner is here, my German colleague, the Minister of Transport of Germany, because probably the first time when the European Commission acknowledges that 1520 is also a part or an achievement of the European Union. We can also see what is happening in the EU economy or in some of the EU countries, and those discussions that are currently held in the EU in order how to overcome this institutional and economic obstacles. So the answer of the Commissioner and the Commission is that the EU has to get more integrated inside itself, and the EU countries should be linked more intensively than it is now. I can support the EU Commissioner because the thought to deep the internal integration of the EU and actually eliminate the bottlenecks and so-called traffic jams among the European sea ports, to eliminate the traffic jams on motorways in Europe, meant that Europeans should use more often the railways. In the Baltic countries, we use the railways for the cargo transport, and the situation in the EU is different, and we are happy about the approach of the Railway Commission. Probably we don't have enough money in the EU, but we shouldn't forget these bridges between the EU and the big trading partner which Russia is, and also bridging with China and some other Asian countries. At the moment it is happening now with the European investments, and it also happens with our national budgets and the railways. They also invest in it, and we want the European Commission, our friends, and the EU members focus more intensive on these future opportunities. And we are also happy that the RZD is still tolerant and supports these relationships with the EU, and we are also continue always offer to intensify this dialogue, and they really understand that RZD is not an authority. And I heard that Mr. Yakunin said about the Russian Ministry of Transport that has institutional relationships with the EU, and it is very good because it can be used in order to improve the further relationships and in planning of transport corridors. There is also political and commercial interest for these transcontinental corridors, and they can be created quite fast. But the funny thing is that NATO created a corridor with the political support of our countries, also from Russia, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan to Afghanistan. NATO created this transport corridor within several months, and it all really works. And the railways of these countries work together, private companies work together, international logistics companies work together, and the result is obvious. I think that it is even easier to create such a corridor between EU and Russia, and we can synchronize the investments from the European Union and from Russia in order to plan it in the future together. I would like to thank you once again to participate in this forum, and I also wish all the participants a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. We're down to the last two speakers now. Carl Friedrich Rausch is a member of the Management Board of DB Mobility Logistics. Carl Friedrich.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simpson. Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear panelists, thank you for having me here and for inviting me being part of this interesting panel of Bridging Europe. It's the second time now that I'm joining this forum in Sochi, and I'm very much looking forward for the mutual exchange we had in the past and we can have here. I would like to bring in this discussion the view of Deutsche Bahn, mainly from its role as a forwarder, but also from its role as a carrier on that route. Since the last 12 months, as we have met here before, we have been very successful, and we are further strengthening our focus on the rail corridor between Europe, Asia, and Russia and China. One of these results, for example, is a newly founded joint venture, YCO, in Chongqing, China, that we established to operate door-to-door rail service between Europe and China. We, that is RCD, Castran Service, the city of Chongqing, Krimt, and DB Schenker. On the map that you see on the screen, and which you have seen several times today, there are two existing physical rail transport corridors between China and Europe, which are used today. But what you don't see yet are two well-established competitive trade lanes between Europe and China. Since the last forum in Sochi 2011, we have achieved a lot, and I would like really to thank all of those who have contributed to the big success of the first trains we are running on these corridors. All of you may be proud of what you have already achieved, be it as a forwarder, as an operator, or as a carrier, be it in China, in Russia, in Kazakhstan, in Belarus, in Poland, or in Germany. And I would really like to thank you for your cooperation. But to be honest, we are just at a starting point. What we really have achieved are two very dedicated but very different solutions for two very distinguished but very challenging and special customers. One being with the automotive industry, the other one being with electronics. One solution being eastbound, another solution going westbound. And took a look to the volumes, just for example. Serving the Shenyang factory for BMW with 5 trains a week, 40-foot containers, 40 per train for a whole year, is more or less the same amount one of these huge big container vessels is carrying by one trip from Hamburg to Shanghai. And this is where we are standing now. This shows on the one hand, there's a huge opportunity outside there because there's a big market, but we really have to find customer-friendly and competitive solutions. And the next step really will be make it a competitive trade lane. Both of them, as physical trans routes we still have. They have to be fulfilled many of prerequisites. Many of them were discussed today, technical ones, legal ones, regulatory ones, operational ones, paper issue, e-business, whatever was mentioned today, it really is true and has to be solved and has to be overcome as obstacles. But on top, there are some additional ones. We still have to find a reliable winter solution for temperature-sensitive goods to transport them from Asia to Europe. We still have to balance eastbound and westbound traffic for cost-efficient round trips. We still have to provide a number of containers or the sufficient number of containers and wagons on both ends of the trade lane. We have to well and cost-efficient organize the repositioning of containers and wagons. We have to provide seamless processes from the view of the customers. We have to offer regular multi-customer trains on both lines. And last but not least, just to come back to what you mentioned, we have to make money with our services, all of us, and this is really a challenge. Just to summarize it, we have a good starting point. We do have proven technical solutions. The market is there, and the market will increase. But the customer won't wait for us. They do have alternatives, and they do have their choice. So please, let's get started and catch the market. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Karl Friedrich. And now, last but certainly not least, Matthias Reuter is the General Director and the Directorate General for Transport and Mobility from the European Commission. So, Matthias.
Thank you very much, Brian. And I know that normally you sit around with a big hammer to stop people from talking too long, so I'll try and synthesize very much what I've taken from the discussions up to now. First of all, allow me to say that, Mr. Yakunin, we are discussing here the Euro-Asian land bridge, but in principle, rail transport between Europe and Russia is much more. We've seen it in terms of passenger, with the presentation of Michael Aho, and in reality, let's not give up on Europe and on Russia also being a producer in terms of freight, rather than just being a transit country. So let's keep that in the back of our minds, and this is linked to the overall growth strategy. I think the second remark I would want to make is, yes, it is true that the European Union also is part of the 1520 community. We have to deal with that because since 2004, 1520 is in the European Union, and we have been dealing with it in the European Rail Agency. We are trying to develop the technical standards for interoperability. There's a lot of things which is actually going on, and I think it is good that this is also noticed on a political level. Inasmuch as the Euro-Asian rail bridge is concerned, just one figure which astonished me a lot is a recent study which we commissioned, which says that there's a potential of taking 10% of the maritime market on the rail if we get it right. If we get it right, because the conditions are developing in the right direction. Industrial production in China is being displaced. There's congestion. We have rules on sulfur, on greenhouse gases. we have slow steaming, we have higher capital costs. If you take all these elements together, there is a potential. But getting it right means dealing with the legal, the technical, the administrative barriers. Customs has been mentioned as one big element. You can also mention liability issues and so on and so forth. Inasmuch as the infrastructure is concerned, we have to realize that we have two different communities. China, large parts of Europe, Russia, different types of gauges. So let's just make a decent analysis in terms of cost-benefit and see whether transshipment is the better idea or whether extension of lines is the better idea. I think we also have to realize that in these times of austerity, there will not be a lot of public money available for that. And that already brings me to my conclusions. First of all, we need to push cooperation on contractual regimes, convergence of rules, working together, that in the OSGD and OTIF or EU context, we do not have totally different rules, so try and make sure that we anticipate different forms of rulemaking. We need rules, and this is in reality, Mr. Loubinot, cooperation for competition, rules on infrastructure access, whether it is in the European Union or from the EU perspective, the questions of trade action, for instance, in Russia. We need to see how we use the corridor platforms in a much better way, also in terms of the cooperation. We also need to discuss much more and commonly the rules of finance. But cooperation doesn't work without trust. In reality, what you, Vladimir Yakunin, are organizing here is a trust-building exercise. A trust-building exercise in terms of trying to see that we get rid of a lot of the obstacles. You've heard some of the interventions here on the podium criticizing the Commission and the European Union for making too technical rules or too many rules. At the same time, what I can also say to the colleagues is we're also getting rid of 27 rules, which to a certain extent we also have to do. And let's try and make sure that we build up this type of trust also between Russia and the European Union in order to make sure that we get the potential of the 10% I was mentioning. So that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Manchester. That brings us to a conclusion of the panel. And again, we're running a little late, but I think in trying to bring it together, what people have said, there are clearly issues that need to be addressed both by the European Union and the 1435 gauge and by those countries that are involved with the 15 and 20 gauge. But I'm always reminded of the fact that being the chairman of a big committee, I'm constantly meeting people who give me problems. What I'm really looking for is the clever one who actually comes with a solution. And I think what we need to try and do together is to, by all means, look at the problems, by all means, be aware of the problems, but work together to create the solution to those problems so that we can move forward. Because if we don't do that, ladies and gentlemen, then we will be coming to Sochi in 2045 and repeating this particular conference. So it's about what I said earlier in my speech, the can-do attitude that is required on both sides to deliver what I think is a project that can be highly successful, not only for us in the European Union, but also for the rest of Europe and for those in the what we will call the 15-20 community. So I thank all my fellow panelists today for their interventions and their words of wisdom. I hope it has generated some thoughts in people's minds as to how we go forward. As I said, we know the problems. Now let's look together for the solutions so we can deliver this vision that we all seem to be so keen to get behind. Thank you, one and all. And if I could ask my panel members now to leave the podium and take to their reserved seats, because next is Mikhail Goncharov, of course, who is the advisor to Mr. Yakunin, who is going to give us a presentation on the wide gauge to Vienna. But thank you very much indeed.